There is a grain that fed entire medieval kingdoms through famine and war. A grain so packed with soluble fiber, it actively heals your gut. A grain that lowers cholesterol, stabilizes blood sugar, and ferments into food your microbiome craves. For 1,000 years, peasants ate it as bread, porridge, and ale every single day, without the bloating, the brain fog, the pain that now sends millions of us spiraling through elimination diets. Then industrial agriculture declared war on it, not because it failed, because it refused to puff into factory bread, because it couldn't be shaped by machines or stretched with additives, because it was too honest, too fibrous, too real. So they replaced it with high-gluten wheat, pushed it into animal feed and beer vats, and convinced an entire generation that the grain their ancestors survived on was obsolete. Today, 10% of adults avoid gluten completely, most without a diagnosis, because modern bread makes them sick. And when they ask why, no one tells them the truth, that the problem isn't their body, it's what we did to the grain. This is the story of barley, the medieval grain that healed, and the system that erased it so you'd never ask questions. The story starts in the coldest, poorest soils of 13th century Europe, places where wheat withered, where rye barely clung to life, where a single bad harvest meant entire villages starved. In those places, barley thrived. It germinated in frozen ground, matured faster than any other cereal, tolerated drought, frost, and soil so depleted that nothing else would grow, and it produced food that kept populations alive when everything else failed. Archaeological records from medieval England, France, and Germany reveal that barley wasn't a backup crop. It was the foundation. Tax records show that up to 60% of cultivated grain in Northern Europe was barley. Monastic account books document barley bread, barley pottage, and barley ale consumed daily by monks, labourers, and peasants. This wasn't poverty food, this was survival technology. The grain that could grow anywhere, store indefinitely, and nourish anyone. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess, physician, and mystic, wrote extensively about barley in her medical texts. She prescribed barley water for fever, digestive distress, and weakness. She noted that barley was warming, gentle on the stomach, and suitable for those with delicate constitutions. Medieval herbalists recognized what modern science would later confirm. Barley didn't just fill the belly, it healed. By the 14th century, barley had become Europe's most democratic grain. Wheat bread was for the nobility. White and refined, a symbol of wealth. Barley bread was dark, dense, and ubiquitous. It fed soldiers marching to war. It sustained labourers building cathedrals. It nourished children through winters that killed half the livestock. And critically, it didn't make people sick. There are no medieval medical texts describing epidemics of bloating from bread. No records of entire populations suddenly unable to digest their staple grain. They ate barley. Their guts adapted. They survived. What medieval physicians didn't have was biochemistry, but today we do. And what modern research reveals is staggering. Barley is one of the richest cereal sources of beta-glucan, a soluble fiber that dissolves in water and forms a viscous gel in your digestive tract. That gel slows glucose absorption, preventing blood sugar spikes. It binds to cholesterol in your intestines and flushes it out, significantly lowering LDL and cardiovascular risk. And when it reaches your colon, it ferments into short-chain fatty acids that nourish gut cells, reduce inflammation, and feed the beneficial bacteria that keep your entire system functioning. A 2024 review published in Foods analysed decades of barley research. The conclusions were unambiguous. Regular consumption of whole grain barley improves gut microbiome composition, increases populations of beneficial bacteria, and helps manage obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and cardiovascular disease. Another study from 2023 tested whole grain Highland barley on animals fed a high-fat diet. The barley group had less weight gain, less arterial plaque buildup, lower inflammatory markers, and a dramatically healthier microbiome. The researchers concluded that barley's fiber, polyphenols, and micronutrients actively protect against metabolic and inflammatory diseases that are ravaging modern populations. This is what medieval Europe ate, not as a health trend, as daily bread, and their digestive systems handled it because barley was real food, prepared in ways that respected the gut. Dense, fibrous, slowly fermented with wild yeast and bacteria that broke down difficult compounds before the bread ever reached a stomach. Medieval bakers didn't understand microbiology, but they understood results. Their bread didn't cause the kind of gut chaos that sends people to doctors today. Then, everything changed. The 19th century brought industrialization, mechanized milling, roller mills that could strip grain down to pure white flour. And with that technology came a shift in values. Bread was no longer about nourishment. It was about status, shelf life, and profit. White bread became the aspirational product. Soft, fluffy, uniform. Bread that could be mass-produced, shipped across countries, and stored for weeks without spoiling. Barley couldn't compete. Its gluten, called hordein, is weaker than wheat's gluten. It doesn't form the strong elastic networks that allow dough to trap air and rise into tall, airy loaves. You can't run barley through industrial mixers and proofing machines. You can't shape it into perfect sandwich bread that springs back when you press it. Barley makes dense, dark, honest bread. Bread that requires chewing. Bread that doesn't photograph well. Bread that doesn't fit the factory. So industrial agriculture made a decision. Push wheat. Breed wheat for maximum gluten content and yield. Subsidize wheat production. Flood the market with cheap wheat flour. And quietly shift barley into secondary roles. Malting for beer. Feed for cattle and pigs. Niche ingredient in soups. By the mid-20th century, barley had nearly disappeared from human diets in industrialized nations. The grain that had sustained Europe for a millennium was rebranded as obsolete. What replaced it was a new kind of wheat. High-gluten modern varieties bred specifically for industrial baking. Wheat that produces flour so strong it can withstand mechanical mixing, chemical dough conditioners, and extended shelf-life additives. Wheat engineered not for your digestion, but for factory efficiency and profit margins. And as that wheat took over, something else happened. People started getting sick. By the early 2000s, reports of gluten sensitivity, bloating, and digestive distress were skyrocketing. Roughly 10% of adults in Western countries now avoid gluten, most without a formal diagnosis of celiac disease. They report the same symptoms: bloating, stomach pain, brain fog, fatigue. And when they eliminate bread, pasta, and processed wheat products, the symptoms often improve. The medical establishment labelled this non-celiac gluten sensitivity and moved on. But recent research has revealed something critical. In many cases, it's not the gluten causing the problem, it's the fructans. Fructans are fermentable carbohydrates, part of the FODMAP family, and modern wheat is loaded with them. When you eat a slice of soft white bread, those fructans reach your colon undigested and ferment rapidly, producing gas, bloating, and pain. High-quality studies have shown that when people with suspected gluten sensitivity are given pure gluten in controlled trials, many don't react. But when they're given wheat fructans, the symptoms return. That means a significant portion of what we call gluten intolerance is actually intolerance to modern wheat and how it's processed. Fast fermentation, chemical additives, refined flour stripped of fiber, high fructan content. It's a perfect storm for sensitive guts. And the medical system's response has been to tell people to go gluten-free, which often means swapping wheat for highly processed gluten-free products made from rice flour, cornstarch, and xanthan gum. Products that are low in fiber, low in nutrients, and often just as hard on digestion as the bread they replaced. No one told them there was another option, a grain that medieval people relied on, a grain that's higher in fiber, richer in minerals, and easier on blood sugar. A grain that doesn't spike insulin, feeds your microbiome, and actually satisfies hunger instead of triggering cravings an hour later. That grain is barley, and it's been sitting in bulk bins and soup aisles, invisible, while millions of people suffered. Here's what you need to know. Barley is not gluten-free. If you have diagnosed celiac disease or a confirmed gluten allergy, barley is off-limits. Barley contains hordeins, which are gluten proteins, and they will trigger an immune response in celiacs, just like wheat. But if your issue is bloating, discomfort, and sensitivity to modern bread, barley might be different. Not because it's magic, because it's closer to what your body evolved to handle, because it's consumed in less processed forms, because it's packed with fiber that slows digestion and feeds beneficial bacteria. Clinical trials have confirmed the effects. Regular barley consumption lowers LDL cholesterol by up to 10%. It improves blood sugar control in people with type 2 diabetes. It increases satiety and reduces overall calorie intake, supporting weight management. And it shifts your gut microbiome towards species associated with lower inflammation and better metabolic health. These aren't marginal benefits. These are the kinds of results pharmaceutical companies try to replicate with drugs that cost hundreds of dollars a month. And yet, barley remains nearly invisible in modern diets. Why? Because you cannot patent it. It's been cultivated for 6,000 years. It's public domain. You cannot sell expensive herbicides for a crop that tolerates poor soil and outcompetes weeds naturally. You cannot sell synthetic fertilizers for a grain that grows with minimal inputs. You cannot create dependency when farmers can save seed and replant indefinitely. The entire economic model of industrial agriculture depends on crops that require constant intervention. Barley doesn't. So barley had to go. But it didn't die. It slept. In seed banks. In the memories of small-scale farmers. In organic bulk bins where people who remember real food still buy it. And now, as the ancient grains market explodes, growing at nearly 40% annually from $3 billion in 2024 to over $43 billion projected by 2032, barley is waiting. Consumers are desperate for grains with a story. Grains that feel authentic. Grains that connect them to something older and more trustworthy than factory food. You can start today. Whole barley is the least processed form, with only the inedible outer hull removed. It cooks in about an hour and retains maximum fiber and nutrients. Pearled barley has been polished to remove the bran, so it cooks faster but has slightly less fiber. Both are fine. Both are vastly better than white rice or refined wheat. Cook it like rice. 1 part barley to 3 parts water. Simmer until tender. Use it as a base for grain bowls. Stir it into soups and stews. Make morning porridge with barley, water, and whatever you'd add to oatmeal. If you bake, try mixing barley flour into your dough. It won't rise as high as pure wheat bread, but that's fine. Dense bread is traditional bread that satisfies. If you make sourdough, replace 20 to 30% of your wheat flour with barley flour. The long fermentation will break down harder to digest compounds, and you'll have something closer to what medieval bakers made. Bread that nourishes instead of inflating. The point isn't to go back to the Middle Ages. The point is to learn from what they got right. They ate grains that could grow in the worst conditions. They prepared food in ways that respected digestion. They didn't have the science, but they had the results. And those results were populations that ate bread every single day without the epidemic of gut dysfunction we see now. Barley didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it was too honest. It didn't fit the machine. It didn't need the chemicals. It didn't create the dependencies that build fortunes. And now, as more of us realize that modern wheat is making us sick, barley is still here, waiting in seed catalogues, waiting in bulk bins, waiting for people who are tired of food that looks perfect but makes them feel broken. You don't have to keep eating food that hurts. You don't have to accept that bread, the staple that sustained human civilization, is now your enemy. There's another way. It's older. It's simpler. It's been tested by 1,000 years of famine, war, and survival. And it's still here. If this video opened something for you, subscribe to Rooted Way and hit the bell. Every share helps preserve this knowledge. The next vault opens soon, and the grain that fed kingdoms is waiting to feed you.